Welcome to the Cheating and Love Tales channel. We are both guilty. The scattered rose petals on our bedroom floor make that perfectly clear. They're the wrong color, bright red, bordering on a feverish crimson, something I'd never choose. I hate how they look on my beige carpet, like small droplets of blood splattered around for all to see. The irony isn't lost on me. I didn't buy them. They were meant for her, but not from me. One glance, and I realize how far we've fallen. I don't bother picking them up right away. Instead, I just stand there, feeling the quiet hum of the air conditioner against my skin, which is clammy with a dull mix of anger and resignation. Outside, the day is too sunny, too bright. A lie. I wish it would rain, because some cliché part of me thinks a storm would suit this moment better. My entire life has the texture of a dream now, as though I'm just outside my body, watching a scene I can't control. I'm the only one home, unless you count the ghost of my dignity, which is probably cowering somewhere behind the couch. Olivia is out, presumably at the office. Tony, my business partner and my wife's, well, let's call him her secret, is likely downtown, wearing a polished grin as he sets up some new deal. I rub my hands together, trying to warm them. I can't recall the last time I felt so cold inside. I walk across the petals, grinding them underfoot. Part of me wants to preserve them as evidence, but there's already enough proof. I found the DNA test in her drawer last week, hidden under a stack of old holiday cards. I can still see my name typed out in black ink, a fatherhood probability of 0%. How neat, how clinical. How final. But none of that was the start. The photo was a single snapshot from a barbecue months ago, discovered beneath a messy stack of invoices on my desk. A backdrop with me fiddling around the grill, pressing hamburger patties while wearing a clueless grin. In the foreground, her slender fingers hooked into Tony's collar, pulling him in close, her eyes lit with excitement, or something more primal. I saw that flash in her expression. It was the kind of look she never gave me. That day, that moment, the entire world sank like a poorly built raft. That evening, I turned the house upside down, searching for anything and everything that would confirm the betrayal I already knew existed. I found bank statements with large sums of money I didn't recognize. I found stray emails with affectionate closings. And of course, the DNA test that told me our child, my supposed daughter, wasn't mine. I'd thought the shock would kill me right there in my own living room. Instead, it gave me a twisted sense of clarity. Because deep down, I realized that I love Olivia, always have. Even after all this, some part of me can't just tear her from my heart. But that love is like an exposed wire, crackling with deadly current. I step over the petals and shuffle toward the bedroom window. My reflection in the glass looks older than I remember, lines crossing my forehead like a roadmap to nowhere. My hair is shorter than it used to be, and there's more gray at the temples, courtesy of the last few weeks of sleepless nights. Liv teased me once, back when everything seemed normal. Let it gray. It makes you look distinguished. But there's nothing distinguished about me now. I feel more like a stray dog. We both once shared this space as a sanctuary. Now it's just a battleground with no visible blood. The petals are scattered evidence of an invasion. And the worst part is, I don't even recall the exact moment we lost each other. Was it gradual, like a slow drain of affection, or was it sudden, triggered by some neglected anniversary or half-forgotten promise? Trying to pinpoint the cause is like trying to find a needle in a haystack while your barn is on fire. Futile. My phone vibrates in my pocket. I fish it out, half expecting some text from Tony or maybe Olivia. But it's an email from a client about a shipping schedule. Real life keeps marching on, oblivious to personal disasters. I ignore it and throw the phone on the bed, next to a single rose petal that found its way there somehow. That petal calls out in bright red, mocking my attempts at calm. My mind wanders back to the day I first met Tony. I'd been expanding my logistics business, fresh out of a partnership fiasco. Tony came recommended by an old acquaintance. He'd strolled into my office wearing a crisp navy suit, smiling like he owned the world. I liked him immediately, or maybe I liked his confidence. We were the same age, more or less. He had that glint in his eye that said, "I get things done." We talked for 3 hours about supply chains and prospective expansions, and by the end, I was convinced we'd double our revenues if we teamed up. It didn't hurt that Olivia found him charming. After our meeting, she said, "That Tony guy is interesting." I brushed it off as casual admiration. In hindsight, I might have recognized a spark between them, but my mind was on numbers, on new warehouses, on building something bigger than I could do alone. I saw Tony as a valuable partner, someone who balanced my cautious approach with his fearless ambition. I recall a cookout at my place, maybe a year into our partnership. That might have been the day the incriminating photo was taken. It started as a typical Saturday. Olivia had insisted that I invite Tony and a few of the employees over for some beer and grilled burgers. Team bonding, she said. You can't just lock yourself in the office every day. She was right. I needed some downtime, and so did the people who worked for me. The sun was scorching. I remember sweat trickling down my back as I flipped burgers over the heat. I'd glance up and see Tony across the lawn, telling some story. Everyone gathered around, laughing. He had that effect on people. Olivia hovered near him, a hand casually on his shoulder. It felt harmless, so I pushed away any flicker of jealousy with a swallow of beer. Stupid, naive me. Meanwhile, I was the dopey husband behind the grill, so sure of his success and his stable marriage. Now, standing in the hush of my bedroom, those memories swirl like ghosts. I can almost smell the charcoal. I can still see Olivia's laugh, a carefree tilt of her head, mouth open in genuine delight. I can't figure out when that laughter turned into something sharpened by resentment and secrets. I bend down to pick up one of the crushed petals, rutting it between my fingers until it disintegrates. The floral scent on my skin is suffocating. I force myself to exhale. This is all so unbelievably real. The old me would have shouted or thrown something through the window. The new me is dangerously calm, as if a furnace inside has run out of oxygen. I lock the house up and get into my car, driving aimlessly until I end up in a parking lot behind a deserted strip mall. That's where I stay, engine off, head resting on the steering wheel, trying to figure out where to begin. I guess the real beginning was that photo. I found it by accident, rummaging around in my study for a missing invoice. My eyes were drawn to the image's blurred foreground. A man's collar, a woman's hand. Then it clicked. That was Olivia's ring, the delicate gold band I gave her on our 10th anniversary. Her fingers were curled into Tony's shirt collar, as if she was pulling him close for a private word, or maybe a stolen kiss. In the background there I was, flipping burgers. I was smiling, but my image was out of focus, literally overshadowed. I stared at that photo for minutes, maybe hours. My stomach turned to lead. The angle suggested an intimate moment. But it could have been harmless, I told myself. Maybe it was just a playful snapshot taken at the wrong time. My instincts, however, screamed that I was looking at something far uglier. I remember my breathing became shallow. My heart pounded in my ears. That primal fear of betrayal, like a creeping dread I'd never known, paralyzed me. Questions swarmed my mind. How long? Why him? Did she love him? Did he love her? And the biggest question of all, did I contribute to this somehow? Even after everything, I suspect the answer to that last question is yes. We are both guilty after all. Maybe I was too invested in the business, or maybe I took for granted that she was content. We seldom fought, but perhaps that was the problem. Absence of conflict isn't always peace. It can be apathy wearing a disguise. I confronted Olivia that night. I showed her the photo. She didn't even flinch, only raised one eyebrow. For a fleeting second, I thought I caught a smirk. She might say it never happened, but I saw that curve on her lips. "And where did you find that?" she asked. Under some paperwork, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Care to explain? That's an old picture, she replied in a voice so casual it hurt. She scrolled through her phone, not even bothering to look at me. So what? What's going on between you and Tony? She sighed, as if I were a child who refused to understand basic math. We're friends, James. Business partners, remember? At some point, I slammed my fist on the kitchen table. My voice came out louder than I intended. Don't treat me like I'm blind. I see how you two. See how we what? She cut in, eyes gleaming. Finish your sentence. I didn't finish it, because part of me feared her answer. She let the silence build until it pressed against my skull. Then she turned and walked away. No denial, no explanation. It was the first time in our 15-year marriage she'd looked at me with such cold contempt. The absence of emotion in her gaze was almost worse than an open confession. That night, she locked herself in the guest room. I stayed in our bedroom, half hoping she'd come out, that she'd storm back in to call me a fool or cry on my shoulder, anything. She never did. Eventually, I fell asleep to the dull hum of the ceiling fan, which felt like a saw against my nerves. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen. She was pouring coffee into a mug, the steam curling around her face. When she noticed me, she set the mug down with a small clink. "Are you going to talk to me?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep and anger. She gave me a long look. "What do you want me to say?" "We're in a rut, James. You know that." "A rut." I repeated the word as if it was foreign. "If we're in a rut, we fix it. We don't." "We don't what?" She snapped. "We don't seek happiness elsewhere. We stay bored for the sake of appearances." I swear a part of me shattered at that moment. I realized she wasn't even trying to hide anything. My anger blossomed. "You want to talk about happiness? Does this include sleeping with my business partner?" She laughed, and it was a cruel laugh. Short, hard, devoid of warmth. "Oh, so we're naming it now. I thought you were still in denial." She left her coffee on the counter, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the house without another word. The front door slammed behind her. I stood there, my mouth open, wanting to scream at her, to chase her, to demand details, but a strange numbness overtook me. I realized that morning that I was dealing with a version of Olivia I didn't recognize. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't begging forgiveness or even lying. She was taunting me, as though my pain was inconsequential, a small bump in her path to whatever she thought she needed. The sting of betrayal is vile, but I think the mocking tone hurt even worse. I felt powerless. A wife who begs for forgiveness still wants something from you. But a wife who finds your outrage amusing, that's something else entirely. Days passed in a haze. I still had a business to run. Tony and I had arranged to meet a new client, so I forced myself to pretend everything was normal. I showed up at the conference room in our downtown office building, with a carefully pressed shirt and an expression carved from stone. Tony strolled in, late as usual, with that confident grin. He extended his hand. "Morning, partner," he said, eyes flicking toward me. I just stared at him. Finally, I shook his hand, but I gripped it tighter than I should have. He winced. "You okay, man?" he asked, eyebrows knitting together. "Never better," I replied, my voice clipped. The meeting dragged on. Tony talked numbers, while I wrestled with the urge to lunge across the table and smash his smug face. My heart hammered, but I sat still. My chest felt tight. For some insane reason, I kept picturing them together, tangled in sheets, her nails raking his back. My imagination tormented me with glimpses of her writhing under him, that throaty moan she used to reserve for our nights. I tried to swallow down the bile rising in my throat. When the meeting ended, Tony asked the client to step out so we could touch base on a few private matters. Once we were alone, he turned to me, the grin gone. "Something's off," he said quietly. "Tell me." My laughter came out as a rasp. "You're really gonna play that card?" He spread his hands in confusion, but behind his performance, I saw a flicker of guilt, or maybe just fear. James, what the hell? Talk to me. The calm veneer shattered. Don't talk to me like we're friends. I know about you and Olivia. You think I'm stupid. He froze, eyes locked on mine. Then he leaned forward, voice dropping. Look, it's complicated. You're sleeping with my wife, I hissed, which is pretty damn simple. He pulled back, pressing his lips together. It just happened. I never planned. Save it. I slammed my hand on the table. My words spilled out raw. If you think I won't tear this entire partnership apart, you're mistaken. You come near me or my wife again, I swear. James, he said, cutting me off. I know you're pissed. Let's just. You don't know the half of it, I said, voice trembling with rage. Now get out of here before I do something we'll both regret. He inhaled a shaky breath, then stood up and left without another word. I slumped into the chair, energy drained. I wanted to scream or cry or break something. But all I managed was a strangled exhale. My mind raced. A swirl of thoughts. Fear, fury, betrayal, heartbreak, collided in my skull. I realized I was in the final leg of a race I never even signed up for. That night, I tried to talk to Olivia again, hoping maybe we could at least air everything out. But she breezed through the front door, wearing a smug expression, not unlike Tony's. I looked at her from across the living room, feeling more like a stranger than a husband. Nice day? I asked, voice deadpan. Productive, she replied, kicking off her heels. I can see from your face you two had a chat. We did. I paused, trying to keep my temper in check. He says it just happened. At that, she let out a short, bitter laugh. Does that explanation make you feel better? Or worse? I swallowed. I don't know, Liv. It makes me feel insane. She glanced at me, maybe noticing the rawness in my eyes for the first time. We're broken, James. Haven't you noticed? We barely talk. You're so wrapped up in your business deals, your plans, your expansions. There's no room left for me. I was building a future for us. I muttered, voice shaking. Maybe I needed a now, she said flatly. Not a future that never arrives. At that, something snapped in me, and tears welled up, humiliating me. I tried to hide them, but she noticed. For a second, a flicker of regret crossed her face. Then her gaze hardened again. Don't cry, she said in a near whisper. It's too late for tears. She turned around and walked upstairs. I stood there, rooted to the spot, trying not to collapse under the weight of everything. In that moment, I was certain of one thing. I still loved her. Despite the betrayal, the mocking, the cruelty, some part of me was tethered to her, like an anchor in a storm, and I hated myself for it. The only place I found any peace was in the old workshop in our garage. Years ago, I'd dabbled in woodworking, back when life felt simpler. I rummaged around dusty shelves, found an unfinished wooden chest I'd once planned to polish as a keepsake. I turned on the light and got to work, sanding the rough edges, focusing on each stroke as if it could smooth out my pain. It was mindless, repetitive, and it forced me to breathe a little slower. Flashbacks kept intruding. Our early years, renting a tiny apartment, painting the walls a hideous mustard color, laughing about it as we cleaned paint off each other's hair. Nights spent lying on a worn-out couch, watching old sitcoms, her head on my shoulder. Our wedding day, bright and filled with promise, where I'd actually believed in happily ever after. I was a different man then, less guarded, full of illusions that love was bulletproof. I sighed, stepping back from the wood chest. My hands were shaking. The overhead bulb buzzed, forming a halo of light that made the rest of the garage seem darker. In that gloom, I faced the truth. Maybe we were both to blame. I allowed distance to fester. She sought passion elsewhere. But knowing that intellectually didn't stop my heartbreak. And heartbreak, in a wounded man, can morph into something dangerous. The next day, I found her phone carelessly left on the kitchen counter. A notification lit up the screen. "Tony, miss you, tonight." My stomach dropped. I pressed my finger to the phone, scanning the thread. I know it was a breach of privacy, but I didn't care anymore. The messages were direct. They spoke of rushed encounters, stolen kisses in hotel rooms. They joked about meeting deadlines that had nothing to do with work. My eyes burned as I took in the words, each one a dagger. But the worst came near the end. "I'll take care of our baby if he can't." Our baby, not mine. I set the phone down, my heart throbbing like it was about to give out. I needed confirmation, hard proof. So I went to her dresser, rummaging. I nearly screamed in triumph and despair when I found it. A neatly folded DNA test. No father match. That was me. A big fat 0. Paper clipped to it was a pregnancy timeline. My chest felt as if someone had pounded it with a sledgehammer. In that moment, I felt a black wave of hatred rise in me. For her, for him, but maybe most of all for myself. Hatred so strong it threatened to drown any lingering affection. I forced myself to breathe, to think. My mind churned with impulses. Confrontation, violence, retaliation. But it also spun with a darker clarity. If she wanted out, I could show her just how permanent out could be. This was the juncture I never thought I'd reach, where love and hate swirl together in the same boiling pot. I took a trembling breath and realized I had to plan my next move. I confronted her that evening. She came home late. The moment she walked through the door, I shoved the DNA test in her face. "Care to explain this?" She looked at it and shrugged, eyes cold. "So you found that too?" I barked a laugh. "What else are you hiding?" "Nothing that matters to you anymore." My voice shook. "That child I thought was mine." "It's not," she interrupted. "So you can relax about any future custody battles." Her words, clipped and heartless, felt like gunshots. My chest burned. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I asked, "Was I ever important to you?" She tilted her head, a brief flash of something in her eyes. "Maybe regret." "Yes, once. But you buried yourself in your business, left me behind. Tony was there." "That's your excuse." My voice cracked with desperation. "You think I deserve this?" "I'm not proud," she said, but her tone was devoid of remorse. "But I'm not ashamed either." My nostrils flared. I found myself teetering on the edge between heartbreak and lethal rage. "You're playing with fire," I said softly. "Both of you." She sighed like she was bored. "I don't care, James." Then she turned on her heel, climbed the stairs, and left me there again. It was a pattern now, a twisted dance we'd perfected. She'd drop a bomb, then vanish before the fallout could reach her. I stood by the sofa for a long time, staring at the blank TV screen. Eventually, I downed a few shots of whiskey, my stomach burning with each gulp. I waited until my head felt heavy. Then I stumbled up to our bedroom. She was in bed, but her back was turned to me. I could hear her breathing. Soft, even, like she was already asleep. How could she sleep so easily? I wanted to shake her awake, demand an answer, anything that would give me hope. But in the end, I crawled under the covers and stared at the ceiling, the whiskey swirling in my gut. Sometime before dawn, exhaustion claimed me, but my dreams were filled with twisted images. Tony's face morphing into mine, Olivia laughing, the child's face hidden in shadow. In the morning, I woke up to an empty bed. She'd left again. That's when I decided I had to leave too, if only for a day. I needed space. I packed a duffel bag, got in my car, and drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town. I paid cash. The room was a dingy box with stained carpet, but at least it was quiet. I sank onto the bed, the old springs creaking, and stared at the yellowing walls. Oddly enough, my father used to say, "Sometimes, you gotta step out of the ring if you want to see how the fight's going." He wasn't a wise man, but that line stuck with me. So I sat there, stepping out of the ring, letting myself feel the sting of betrayal in all its rawness. Memories floated around. Olivia's mocking laughter, Tony's crooked grin, the crisp DNA results. My heart ached as if it had physically torn. Later, I walked to a nearby liquor store, bought a bottle of cheap scotch, and returned to the motel. I drank until my throat felt raw. Then I lay on the bed, trying to numb my thoughts. But the pain refused to go away. Instead, it mutated into a dark determination. I couldn't just let them get away with this. Some line had been crossed, and the old me, the naive, trusting me, had already died. Between gulps of scotch, my mind pieced together a plan, fueled by bitterness and desperation. They'd humiliated me, lied to me, cheated me out of my own fatherhood. Maybe I couldn't have justice in the normal sense, but I'd have my own brand of revenge. Because if there was one thing I knew, it was the leverage I had over both of them. The business was mine too. The finances, the property, the intangible connections. And I had an entire arsenal of silent moves I could make before either of them realized what was happening. By noon the next day, I returned home. The house was quiet. Olivia was at work. I stepped into my office, locked the door, and began rummaging through files. I had complete access to everything. Bank accounts, business details, legal documents. Tony and I might be partners, but I oversaw the administrative side. Over the next few hours, I carefully initiated a series of small, inconspicuous transactions. Just enough to sow confusion, to start building a firewall around certain resources. I wasn't sure how far I'd go yet, but I needed the option. Every click of my mouse felt like a small dose of twisted satisfaction. If they wanted to treat me like a fool, I'd show them how cunning a cornered animal could be. I transferred small sums to accounts only I controlled. I altered some key data in our shared spreadsheets, planting seeds that would later ruin Tony's illusions of unstoppable success. I also made sure to cover my tracks, clearing histories, using methods that were second nature to me after years of handling the company's finances. When I was done, my hands trembled with adrenaline. I couldn't undo the betrayal, but I could dismantle what they held dear. If I had to burn everything down to get rid of the infection, so be it. That's the moment Olivia chose to walk in. The door to my office was unlocked, and she opened it. I turned around quickly, nearly knocking over a pen holder. "What are you doing?" she asked, suspicion lacing her voice. I forced a casual shrug. "Working. Trying to salvage my life while you gallivant around with Tony." She cocked her head. "If you must know, I just came back to grab some documents." "For Tony?" She gave me a faint smirk. "Yes, for Tony." Her tone stung, but I was prepared this time. "Have fun." I turned my back on her and pretended to rifle through files. I could feel her eyes on me, assessing. Then she let out a small, mocking laugh, like she knew she'd won, and left. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I exhaled, forcing myself to remain calm. She might think she's unbreakable, but she hadn't seen the storm I was brewing. Let her think she's untouchable for now. Night came, dark and silent. I didn't see Olivia anywhere. I wandered the house, noticing how empty it felt without her presence. A pang of nostalgia hit me. I sank onto the couch, remembering a happier time. Her curled up next to me, wearing one of my old t-shirts, trying to warm her feet against my legs. I would tease her, telling her I wasn't a human heater, but the truth was I loved it. I loved feeling needed. I missed that version of us, the version that believed in the simplicity of loving each other. A wave of black humor washed over me. Now she was probably warming her feet against Tony's legs. Maybe they were even laughing about me, the gullible husband. The thought made me let out a harsh chuckle that quickly turned into a choked, bitter sob. "God," I muttered, wiping my eyes. "I'm pathetic." Then my phone rang. I stared at the screen. It was Tony. Of all people, Tony calling me at 9 at night. I debated ignoring it, but some twisted curiosity made me hit. Accept. What? I snapped. I want to talk, he said. His voice sounded tense. Meet me at Palmer's Diner in half an hour. Neutral territory. Why? He hesitated. Because I think we need to settle this before it gets worse. I let out a bark of laughter. Settle? Do you even grasp what you did? A sigh crackled through the line. I know, okay. Just meet me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe I needed to look him in the eye one more time, to see if there was any shred of remorse. Palmer's Diner sat off the highway, a relic from the 1960s with neon lights flickering in the shape of a coffee cup. Inside, the walls were plastered with vintage posters. The place smelled of frying oil and stale coffee. Tony was in a corner booth. I slid in across from him, my chest tight. Thanks for coming, he said. I got you a coffee. I snorted. I'll pay for my own. Suit yourself. He pushed the mug away. Look, James, you know I respect you. Everything we built. Don't feed me that, I cut in. You stabbed me in the back. He ran a hand over his short hair, eyes downcast. I know. It was a shitty thing to do. Then why'd you do it? I leaned forward, voice low. Of all the women you could have, you had to choose my wife. His jaw tightened. We connected. It started as a few conversations, complaining about how you were never around, how she felt neglected. Then one night, I held up a hand. Spare me the details. You think I can't imagine. You think I haven't pictured you too. He glanced at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm hoping we can keep this from destroying everything. The business, our lives. Let's just. I slammed my fist on the table. The cups rattled. A waitress cast us a worried glance. You want me to pretend it never happened? He licked his lips. I want to move on. I'll step back if that's what you want. You have no idea how big this is, I growled. She's pregnant. Did you know that? You're going to be a father. He recoiled like I'd slapped him. She didn't. She never said. It's your kid, Tony. DNA test confirms it's not mine. His face paled. For a moment, he looked genuinely shocked. Maybe she hadn't told him. Or maybe he was just a good actor. Dan, he whispered, voice trembling. I didn't. Stop, I cut in, tired of his denials. You expect me to keep you both in my life after this? After I find out I was living a lie? I can't do that. He buried his face in his hands, then looked up. Look, man, I'm sorry. I swear I didn't mean. I stood abruptly, my heart pounding. Don't call me man. You lost that right. Stay away from me. From now on, I'm your worst enemy. You and Olivia deserve each other. I tossed some bills on the table, ignoring his pleading expression. As I left, I felt a storm of emotions roiling in my gut. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. But also, ironically, a trace of triumph. Now he knew about the child. Let him stew in that. Let him face the responsibility he so casually courted. It's strange how betrayal warps your sense of time. Each day after that felt like a week. Each week like a month. My dealings with Tony became purely transactional. We communicated by email or through our lawyer for business matters. Olivia was effectively a ghost in the house, coming and going without explanation. The tension was suffocating. I avoided her, she avoided me, and in the silence grew a monstrous resentment. One night, I spotted her in the kitchen, rummaging in the fridge for a late snack. She looked up at me, and for a fleeting second, there was a glimmer of the Olivia I used to know. Soft eyes, a slightly worried furrow to her brow. Are you okay? She asked quietly, as though something might still be salvaged. I stared at her, my throat tight. Then she blinked, and her gaze turned cold again, as if she remembered she was supposed to despise me now. She shut the fridge door and brushed past me without another word. I stood there, disoriented, struggling to hold on to the memory of that small concern in her eyes. For the next few weeks, I orchestrated my plan. Quiet sabotage. Diverting money, forging internal documents that would incriminate Tony. I was treading a fine line. Some of what I did bordered on illegal. But I no longer cared. Hate is a powerful motivator, and heartbreak can be the fuel that keeps it burning. I spent sleepless nights finalizing each detail. I'd present Tony with a series of nasty financial surprises, forcing him into a corner. Meanwhile, I collected evidence of his affair. Photos, text messages, anything I could muster that could be used to ruin him socially or legally if he tried to fight me on the business front. I was turning into someone I hardly recognized. But maybe that was the point. The old James would have tried to reconcile, to fix things. This new James had nothing to lose. During this time, Olivia seemed restless. She'd throw half-hearted barbs my way. But mostly she was distracted. I caught her on the phone with Tony, discussing the baby in hushed tones. She didn't even bother hiding it. The only comfort I had was knowing that each day I was pulling the rug out from under both of them. But as the old saying goes, when you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. I felt myself sinking. My hair started going grayer at the temples. My appetite disappeared. Sleep became a battlefield of nightmares. Yet, ironically, one thought kept me from tipping over the edge. I still love her, some insane corner of my heart insisted. Even after everything. If she looked at me right now and said, "I'm sorry, I want you back," would I crumble? Maybe. That was the humiliating part. My anger was mortal, but my love seemed to endure like some stubborn weed. A flashback hit me hard one Saturday morning as I sat alone on the porch, sipping black coffee. I remembered a day years ago when Olivia and I took a trip to a lakeside cabin in Oregon. We woke up early to watch the sunrise. The lake was so still it looked like glass. She was curled up in a blanket, her hair messy, her eyes half closed with contentment. I held her close, and she whispered, "Promise we'll do this again every year." I promised, but we never did. Work, life, responsibilities. There was always something. I think we let each other down so many times in small ways that it added up to this colossal ruin. I stared at the street in front of our house. Neighbors mowed lawns, kids rode bikes, someone walked a dog. The normalcy of suburban life mocked me. Then I realized I needed to finish what I started. Because the part of me that still loved her was also the part that needed closure, no matter how bloody. Culmination came on a Thursday. I'd arranged a meeting with Tony at the office to finalize a major deal with a new client. Olivia was also supposed to show up, as she was handling the marketing side. I arrived early, perched in the conference room, the blinds half drawn. The tension in my chest felt like a coiled spring. Tony walked in, expression uneasy. Olivia trailed behind him, wearing a tight-fitting navy dress that showcased her pregnancy bump, which was now becoming visible. My heart clenched at the sight of her, a stark reminder of what I had lost or never really had. We sat around the table, the air thick with unspoken accusations. I opened the file containing the contract. Tony eyed me, then the papers. "All right, let's just get this done," he said, voice tight. "We have a client waiting." I nodded curtly and set down the documents. As Tony scanned them, a frown deepened on his face. He flipped through the pages, confusion growing. Meanwhile, Olivia tapped her fingers on the table, glancing between us. "James," Tony said, voice pinched, "this can't be right. These numbers, are you sure this is the final version?" "It's what I have," I replied evenly. "Go ahead and sign." He glared at me, flipping to the last page. "This is insane. I see references to multiple sub-accounts I don't recognize. Why is money being funneled? Are you suggesting I don't know how to handle my own business?" My voice was like ice. "If you can't keep track of your finances, that's your problem." Olivia's eyes darted between us. "James," she said, in a tone that almost sounded concerned, What's going on? I ignored her, keeping my gaze on Tony. Slowly, he realized he'd walked into a trap. James, he said, enunciating each syllable. What did you do? I shrugged. I simply made sure certain funds were allocated properly. That's all. You'd know that if you'd been paying attention to your duties instead of other pursuits. He slammed the folder shut. You can't do this without my consent. Actually, I can, I said, producing another file from my briefcase. These documents say otherwise. He grabbed the file, scanning it, color draining from his face. I caught Olivia's shocked gaze, her lips parted, as if about to speak but uncertain of what to say. You bastard, Tony muttered. This is basically a forced buyout, I said calmly. At a significantly reduced rate. You might recognize your own signature on some of these preliminary agreements. You really should have read the fine print. Olivia let out a small gasp. James. Tony's face twisted in anger. You forged my signature. You know that's illegal, is it? I arched an eyebrow. Or did you sign some documents in haste months ago, when we first discussed expansions? Hard to recall, right? You were probably distracted. He looked ready to leap across the table and throttle me. I stared him down, heart pounding, but outwardly calm. Olivia's face paled, her eyes darting in panic. I pressed on, voice steady, feeding off their fear. I'm giving you both a choice, I said softly. You step away, cleanly, quietly, and I don't take this evidence to the authorities. Or do you want me to show them the digital footprint of your mismanagement of funds? Because I've got it all neatly compiled, Tony. Enough to bury you. You set me up, he said hoarsely. Sure did. Olivia's trembling voice interrupted. James, why are you doing this? I shot her a glare. Why? I think you know exactly why. She looked away, hugging her arms around her baby bump. Tony swallowed, trying to compose himself. What's your endgame? I leaned forward. You walk away from the company. Sign over everything. As for you, I turned to Olivia. If you want to stay with him, go. But don't expect a dime from me. Don't expect me to support that child. You two wanted each other so badly. Now you can have each other, with nothing else in your pockets but your precious love. Silence fell. Tony clenched his fists, trembling. Olivia's eyes brimmed with tears. Her lower lip quivered, but she kept her dignity. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. You said you loved me. I felt a stab of agony. I did. Maybe I still do. But you killed that love the moment you stepped into bed with him, and then laughed in my face about it. She blinked, tears rolling down her cheeks. But she said nothing, made no plea for forgiveness. Her pride or anger wouldn't allow it. Tony stared at me, then at her, then back at the documents. Fine, he rasped. I'll sign, but don't you think for a second this is over. He yanked a pen from his pocket and scrawled his signature. Olivia just stood there, silent tears falling, as if too numb to protest. Tony slammed the pen on the table and shoved the papers at me. Go to hell, he spat. I gathered the documents, my hand steady despite my racing heart. Likewise, I rose from my seat and walked to the door. Before stepping out, I turned. Have a wonderful life. Then I left, my footsteps echoing in the stark hallway. A weight lifted off my chest, replaced by a cold emptiness I couldn't define. Outside, the autumn air felt crisp. I inhaled, letting the swirl of leaves around my feet remind me of the inevitability of change. My phone buzzed in my pocket. An email notification. Without looking at it, I knew it was done. My revenge had reached its climax, and I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. I'd destroyed Tony professionally, possibly ruined Olivia's prospects of a comfortable future. The vow I made to stand by her in sickness and in health lay in tatters. Yet here I was, freed from the shackles of betrayal, but also anchored in sorrow. It occurred to me that revenge never really closes the wound. It just injects it with more poison, I drove home, found the house empty. I took that as a sign that Olivia had chosen Tony, or perhaps just chosen to leave. I walked around the living room, noticing how the furniture felt oppressive, how the pictures on the walls seemed to watch me with judgment. A framed photo of our wedding day caught my eye. Me in a tux, looking young and hopeful, her in a white dress, glowing like an angel. We looked so stupidly happy. I lifted the frame and hurled it into the fireplace. The glass shattered, pieces spraying across charred logs. It felt more symbolic than destructive, and it gave me a dark sense of release. That night, I made a meager dinner, just a simple sandwich, which I ate in silence at the kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing. Each bite tasted like cardboard. Afterward, I walked through the house, thinking about the life I built here, the stories, the memories. A laugh escaped me, humorless. All those years of devotion, undone by one photo, one betrayal that blossomed into an unrecognizable landscape of pain. I trudged upstairs, my feet heavy. In the bedroom, I found the scattered petals I'd left days ago were now crumpled and dry. The bed was still unmade, the imprint of her body on the sheets. My body went rigid, remembering how we used to lie there, her breath warming my neck in the early mornings. A wave of longing crashed over me, fierce and all-consuming. Tears stung my eyes. I sank onto the edge of the bed, letting that longing swirl. For a moment, I wondered if I should have fought for her differently, begged her to stay, tried to patch things up. But the thought of sharing her with Tony, knowing he was the father of her child, made my stomach churn. I couldn't live that half-life. Some twisted part of me realized I still wanted her in a way. I wanted her laughter, her presence, her touch. But the betrayal was too deep, too raw. So I stared at the rumpled sheets, feeling my mind tilt under the weight of irreconcilable truths. I don't know how long I sat there, immersed in memories. At some point, I stood and got into the shower. The hot water ran over my shoulders, washing away the day's tension. When I stepped out, I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing the stranger. My hair was wet, clinging to a face lined with sorrow. My eyes, blue and bloodshot, seemed haunted. Now I'm ready to face my own reflection, I whispered, recalling some vow I'd once made to be honest with myself, no matter how brutal the truth. And the truth was, in some twisted sense, we were both guilty. I had neglected her. She had lied to me. Tony had exploited the rift. I had taken vengeance. We were all mired in this cesspool, and no one truly won. I slipped on a pair of boxers and an old t-shirt, then crawled into bed. The silence was absolute. I almost wished I'd hear her footsteps on the stairs, her soft voice calling me from the hallway. But there was nothing. I closed my eyes, letting exhaustion claim me. Dawn arrived with a muted gray light seeping through the blinds. I got up, shoulders stiff, and went downstairs. Coffee felt like the only constant in my life now. I brewed a pot, the aroma filling the silence. Then I checked my phone. Multiple messages awaited me, some from lawyers, some from employees confused by sudden changes in the company structure, and one from Tony, of all people. "You'll regret this." I ignored it. The next message was from Olivia. "I'm moving out. Don't worry, you won't see me again. I won't cause trouble, as long as you don't either." I stared at her words for a long time, trying to decode some hidden meaning, but there was none. It was cold, final. I exhaled, took a sip of coffee, and allowed myself a moment of raw pain. She was gone, out of my life, presumably with Tony, or maybe alone. The baby was his, not mine. All that was left was the shell of a house and the echoes of what could have been. As the coffee cooled in my hand, my mind drifted toward the future. Maybe I'd sell the house. Maybe I'd leave this town, find a fresh start in some new place. The finances I'd secured allowed me enough freedom to do as I pleased. But I knew no matter where I went, part of me would remain tethered to these memories. I heard a faint noise outside, a truck rumbling to a stop. I peered through the window, saw a moving van. Two men jumped out, walked toward the house next door, presumably there to move new neighbors in. Life continues in the spaces around our personal tragedies. It's a reminder that the world doesn't stop because you're drowning in heartbreak. I sat in silence, letting the swirl of longing, remorse, and triumph fade into a dull ache. My final move had been played, my revenge exacted. She was gone. Tony was ruined. And me. I'm alive, but I'm not sure if I'm whole. That evening, I built a small fire in the fireplace. I tossed in documents that no longer served any purpose. Copies of the buyout, old pictures, even an outdated wedding invitation I found stuffed in a drawer. The flames devoured them, curling the edges in an orange glow. I watched the ashes rise, dancing upward into the chimney, leaving behind only gray remains. The final piece I threw in was that photo, the one with her fingers on his collar, me in the background grilling burgers. It landed atop the logs, her face half burned already, her eyes glowing as if mocking me one last time. I crouched there, mesmerized by the flicker. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. This was it, the last tangible relic of the life I thought I had. A wave of sorrow crashed over me, so fierce it nearly doubled me over. But as the photo blackened, I felt a strange sense of release. The crackle of flames sounded almost comforting. I whispered to the shadows, "I'm free." No one heard me but the ghost of my old self. Months later, I'd move on, at least logistically. I'd sell the house. I'd cut ties with Tony completely. Olivia would remain a distant figure in my mind, the woman I once adored, but who slipped away into betrayal. Perhaps they'd stay together, or maybe not. The only certainty is that the child isn't mine, and that was my final heartbreak, and salvation in one. Heartbreak, because I lost a chance at fatherhood, and salvation, because it allowed me to close the door on a life built on lies. In the end, the final truth is I still love her in a warped, indestructible way. A piece of me always will. But love can only survive in your mind for so long, starved of hope. It becomes a memory, a bruise, no longer a living entity. And that's enough of a reality check to keep me moving forward, step by step, day by day. Did I do the right thing by unleashing my revenge? Maybe, maybe not. Hate and love are two sides of the same coin. But sometimes, a man has to tear down the structure to find out what remains of himself beneath the rubble. That's what I did, and all I can do now is keep breathing. Standing here, in an empty house stripped of furniture and memories, I place my hand on the front door handle. The place feels alien, like a hollow shell. The echo of footsteps on bare floors resonates like a funeral dirge. I should feel triumphant, but all I sense is a quiet numbness and the faint flicker of black humor that says, "You got your payback, old man." Now what? I open the door, step out into the fading light of dusk, and lock it behind me. The key in my hand feels cold, final. I drop it into an envelope for the realtor. That's it. I don't look back at the house, or the porch, or the scattered remnants of a life that once was. I walk to my car, breathe in the crisp air, and face my own reflection in the side mirror. For better or worse, this is who I am now. And in the quiet of my soul, I hear an echo. We are both guilty. But sometimes guilt is all we have left to remind us of the love we once had. I start the engine, pull out of the driveway, and drive away, carrying the weight of my choices with me, uncertain if I'll ever truly outrun the ghosts I've conjured. But for now, at least I'm free of the lies. And that for a man like me will have to be enough.